Hi, Ricarda. Thank you so much for
Hi,
taking your
Sandra.
time today to answer our career angel questions. First off, for all of those who are watching today and who don't know you, could you please introduce yourself?
My pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to talk to you again. My name is Ricarda Betzing. I'm the head of HR and communications at a global automobile company. I have 20 years of experience in the field of HR management on an international level. And during those 20 years, I found my calling in the areas of talent acquisition and management. I think it's largely because they are very communication intensive, which is one of my prime disciplines. And they also present an ace opportunity for growth to me, which ultimately also translates as getting closer to the business. And I think that's the essence of my job, really.
One of the reasons why we decided it would be a good idea to have this conversation today is that not only have you been with, you have not been with one organization for your entire career, but you have also been on the candidate side.
That's right.
In recent years, right? So you have
Yes.
both. Have a good feeling for both sides of the recruitment process.
I would hope so. Now, evidently, I'm not on the other side of the table all the time and doing the interviewing. As a matter of fact, I myself was a candidate not too long ago because the role I currently hold is something I've been having for just over a year. And so evidently my memory of what it's like to be in the candidate's shoes is quite fresh. But even so, I would say I bring along quite some empathy, which allows me to really put myself in the shoes of the person before me. And by that, I mean, of course, the one that is hoping to get away with the job at the end of the discussion.
Now, I find it very valuable to be able to speak to you today because not only do you have, as you said, give or take 20 years of experience in HR, but you also have a relative fresh perspective of what it means to be a candidate looking at the last 5 or something years.
Yes.
Now, looking at how the market has changed in the last years, I don't want to start talking right away about COVID and the changes COVID has had on the job market, but I want to just start a little bit further and ask you, what kind of changes have you observed or experienced on the job market in the last years? And when did the changes actually start? Did they start 3 years ago, 7 years ago, 5, 10?
Yeah.
Share that as well.
Right. I would say I started noticing a significant shift towards the turn of the millennium. And with that, of course, HR inevitably needed to become more and more resourceful to attract candidates with sufficient qualification and motivation, and candidates who at the same time would come with a different set of expectations than their predecessor. Mostly by means of, let's call it timetable or work hour flexibility, but also having a more active say in their job design. So they wouldn't just accept a job description as it was presented to them, but maybe even put into question 1 or 2 dots or points on the job description itself. So that was certainly something which became quite apparent quite a few years back. And in the meantime, of course, there have been all kinds of technological advances, as you know yourself. Who would have imagined extensive candidate hunt by means of active search or social media during those days? The year 2000, I think those concepts weren't even thought of or dreamt of. And I would say HR boot camps, or whatever they're called these days, they were certainly not as mainstream as they are now. And this has also allowed, and I'm deliberately saying allowed rather than forced, HR to come out of this somewhat dusty, outdated corner or outmoded corner of admin only and be or become a true business partner. And that's a role I've always enjoyed playing very much, because this is one of the prime opportunities where HR can really show what they're made of and demonstrate added value, give added value very fast. And of course, at the same time, also increase collaboration or closeness to the business. And my experience tells me that's always been a good thing.
Mhm.
And I would say also that during the past couple of years, the rate at which advancements have dawned upon us has been ever increasing. And well, to sort of delve a little into car lingo, the road towards more flexibility, be it manner, place, or time, has taken place at an ever increasing pace. And well, especially since you mentioned COVID earlier on, if not, I would have brought it up now.
Mhm.
If I look back at the past 6 months during which the speedometer just went wild, and I think you can judge this as well as I can say that all three criteria made us fuel the engine with ultra high octane, and we had to be reactive from one moment to the next.
Mhm.
Be it by introduction of short-term work, which happened basically overnight. No matter which country you look at, it must have been the same all over the place, at least where Europe is concerned.
If
And that
if
coupled with
governments
remote, excuse me,
if governments obviously had options of short-term work.
precisely. And that coupled with remote working at a rate previously unprecedented or even unimagined, really made sure that our agendas were quite full. And I'm saying this not so much with a view to talent acquisition, because I think you also know the impact on the job market, but this was a time, and it's not over yet, this was a time which really meant that HR had to give it their all.
Mhm.
Of course, here I'm not talking about people who are actually in-house already, but when we again look at the other side of the table, the increased flexibility is of course also expected from candidates because, well, you know, nowadays sadly the economic situation is such that companies had to lay off employees. They still do in some sectors. So far so good for us, but I'm crossing my fingers, and you cannot see that my toes as well. Short-term work is still an issue. And I notice as well, and not the least in my sector, that temporary contracts, more often than not, with an option for extension or indefinite appointment, seems to be becoming the norm.
Mhm. Now, I know that very naturally the conversation moved to COVID, but if you allow me, I'd like to still take a step back and ask you, how is the job market from 3 years ago different than the job market 10 years ago?
Well, if you want a very snappy answer, it would be dearth of qualified candidates.
Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate?
Absolutely. I'm very active in all stages of the recruitment process. So I put together the job spec, which will go out. I do a first scan of resumes which come in, and I also every now and then do first telephone screenings so that I can then give the dossiers to my line managers with a bit more feedback and allow them to get a better understanding of the kind of person we are talking about. And I remember that like 10 years ago, there would be an abundance of candidates. And I'm also talking qualified candidates here. So not just every Tom, Dick, and Harry. And this has changed. I think it's now changing again. And this plays into what I said earlier with companies having to lay off for economic reasons. But there has been a certain saturation from what I can see, and this definitely had become a candidate market. And I'm not talking for Switzerland only, because colleagues in other countries confirm every now and then what I'm telling, in the sense that companies really have to convince candidates these days to come and join them, rather than just putting an ad out and waiting to be almost run over by hordes of candidates who can dream of no better thing in their next life phase than to join company XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
So this is certainly something, excuse me. So this is certainly something which holds true with or in practically all the companies I've been working for, with maybe one exception, but there we are talking of a very high brand recognition name. And I mean, may I say it? Everybody wants to work for FIFA, of course.
Yeah, of course. Okay, and now continuing talking about candidates, how has that changed in the last 6 months? You already hinted at the fact that there are now more candidates and more qualified candidates, but what has changed also in candidate behavior, for example?
Mm-hmm. I think what has changed is certainly the, let's say, the environment or the mood the candidates find themselves in.
Mm-hmm.
The factor job security is a lot less pronounced in the everyday life than it used to be beginning of this year. To give you a very hands-on, a very recent example, we now have an ad out for a person in one of our departments to become our administrator in a certain field of activity, and we deliberately put that this is a temporary contract with an option for indefinite appointment.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, we even get applications from candidates who already have an indefinite contract. Therefore, there doesn't seem to be the imminent need for them to look for something elsewhere. But the risk, or the perceived risk, meaning the fear of losing a job, really propels candidates to exploit other possibilities, maybe shorter term, with a view to making that a long-term experience,
Mm-hmm.
than they would normally do. Or put this differently, I think had we put that ad out in January or May, February this year, the response would have been very different than the one we're seeing now.
Mm-hmm.
And this, in my opinion, is something which will manifest itself in months to come. And possibly we are talking even longer time span than months only.
Mm-hmm. What other trends have you observed or phenomena over the last, well, probably some of the things you started observing a year, 2 years ago have only been accelerated by COVID. So what
Right.
other things, behaviors, phenomena have you observed?
I think the overruling term here would be flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Also in terms of, well, I think I partly answered that in terms of contract conditions, appointment duration, and I would say flexible work arrangements are becoming a lot more commonplace than they used to be. I'm seeing this also with my own employer, for whom work from home was certainly an issue, but it was not as predominant as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that some areas, some departments can propose or can coordinate a lot more than in the past who of their people will come to the office, when this should be the case, or how many, how often. So the frequency, the office occupancy, if you like, is a lot more open for discussion than it used to be, again, a couple of months back, because that's all we're talking. And of course, the contract conditions, the contract duration as such, which inevitably would also lead to some adjustments in the legal field, because let's take the Swiss example here. In Switzerland, it's just not legally possible to have one temp contract after another.
Mm-hmm.
So you cannot, what is called chain contracts, so you cannot have one temporary appointment follow another right away. Up to a certain point you may, but after 2 years it's over. And I think this is also where the wind of change is likely to blow, because naturally, well, economy is one thing, but then the legal field will have to follow. And my impression is that, well, temporary appointments will become a lot more commonplace, a lot more accepted, or more widely accepted than they are now. And I think they will also lose what I might even call stigma in some circles, where temporary contracts are always seen as something that is a little suspicious, and why didn't you stay in for the long haul, and what is wrong with you?
Mm-hmm. I'd like to change subject a little bit. I mean, we'll still talk about the job market.
Sure.
Knowing that the majority of our viewers are experienced managers and executives who are very consciously thinking about their career and their career management. Some of them are looking for a job, some are not, but it's good to know what's happening currently. From an HR perspective, so from the client side or the employer side, what kind of behavior do you appreciate in candidates, and what kind of behavior, well, don't you like that much, if I can say that
Right.
that way?
I think what is always appreciated on the employer side is when a candidate puts in the extra mile and prepares him or herself for a job he or she is supposedly willing to land. Time and
question here, sorry to interrupt you with your first comment. Shouldn't that be obvious when we talk about experienced managers and executives that they know that they should be preparing?
One might think so. For one reason or another, it is not always happening.
How much is not always?
I didn't catch the question, excuse me.
How much is not always? Like how many % do you have the feeling they should have done a better job at preparing?
I would say 1 out of 10.
So 10% is prepared?
So we're talking, yeah, we're talking
Okay.
10%, yeah. And that is something I would chalk up to some sort of devil-may-care attitude. For whichever reason, candidates losing interest, maybe not informing us that they don't intend to come to the interview. Again, who wouldn't bother preparing because for whichever reason they might feel they got the job in the bag already. I personally think it's not such a great choice to leave the preparatory work to others because, well, it doesn't exactly look good when the company reps ask you questions and you just twiddle your thumbs. And also, I would say you deprive yourself of ammo. And again, an excellent opportunity to show your interest, to show your dedication when it's your time to ask questions. And also, if you're late for an interview, I would suggest, and even if it's 5 minutes or even less, call up your interlocutor and tell them that you're running late. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything that is your fault. It can be something completely beyond your control or force majeure, as they say. But doing it or failure to do so in the adverse sense does say a lot about you. And it also makes the technical representative or the line manager or the hiring manager think twice. And
you mentioned that candidates, one thing is being late, but then you also mentioned there are candidates who don't show up for interviews.
Correct.
How often, again, percentage-wise, how many don't cancel their interviews and just simply don't show up?
I would say not as frequently as the unprepared ones, thankfully, but I've had it once or twice in the course of last year. And I always felt, well, I have one specific case in mind, and I always felt it was a pity because we had a really good connection going over the phone. And I thought also from the personality point of view, that person could have made a very good addition to our marketing team. But for one reason or another, she never showed up, and well, that was the end of that.
Did she apologize for not?
Well, I couldn't get a hold of her because I called and there was just no answer. Then I called again, and whoever answered the phone hung up on me immediately. So I guess that pretty much translated as, "Oh no, thanks. Don't call us. We call you, if ever."
Has ghosting increased this year? Do you have more candidates not show up for interviews?
No. Quite the contrary. I must also say we haven't had that many vacancies out this year for reasons we discussed before. It's picking up again now. And so far, I'm crossing my fingers again, so far with very good reaction.
Okay. I think I interrupted you with my follow-up question in terms of what kind of behavior you appreciate or don't appreciate that much in candidates. Is there anything else that you would like to add to that list?
Well, maybe the fact that I've been a culprit too, in a way. And I'm telling you this because I don't mean to sound as if I was on my moral high ground here and I'm telling you how to run your shows. But I once had to call my interviewer because the train I was on got stuck halfway and I had to cover the last bit on foot. Needless to say, I was wearing new shoes, so this got extra pleasant. And they were surprised in the end that I actually made it almost on time. I was only 10 minutes late. And I just chalked that up to the fact that I'm an avid runner, so I have enough practice. Gave us, of course, a prime start into the discussion because it turned out that my future supervisor was quite a whale on track running. So you might almost say this was a blessing and a curse, or a blessing in disguise rather. And it sure made me feel a lot better about, well, not having been on the train that got stuck, but about having bothered to call them and warn them that I wouldn't show up on time.
Any other interesting candidate situations that you've either observed, experienced yourself on either side of the coin?
I would say one candidate was called in from South America.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't quite sure about the connections and was really trying his best to make it on time. And in the end, he had to call us and say, well, I'm sorry, I think I'm just not going to make it. And I'm seriously sorry. I'm sure I will miss this opportunity. And then it turned out, for whichever miraculous reason, he caught an earlier flight. So he was there, well, way in advance. And I cannot tell you how surprised we were, pleasantly, of course. And the interview turned out to be quite a good one, even though, of course, he was heavily jet-lagged and he was all excited. But yeah, I think he was as happy as we were, or we were just as happy as he was, that he had been able to make use of that.
Mm-hmm. What about your experience as a candidate? What has surprised you, or what positively or negatively surprised you when you were the one being interviewed?
Right.
Or were in recruitment processes in general?
Maybe why don't we start with the positive impressions?
Mm-hmm.
I would say sometimes it's the way I like it is a recruitment interview that doesn't have too much of an interrogation spirit to it,
Mm-hmm.
but is really a conversation between two interested parties. And that, in my experience, allows for a relaxed conversation, which then gives you much, as an interviewer, as a recruiter, gives you a much better opportunity to really sound out the candidate or to feel the candidate, rather than if you put the pressure on or play the good cop, bad cop game. My personal low would be being asked whether I was married. That was 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking, I don't know, mid-50s or something. Next, I was supposed to explain my political views. At that time, there had been one referendum in Switzerland to curtail immigration. And the finishing touch was a disapproving remark on account of the fact that I had done my hair differently than was on the picture when I sent it.
All in the same interview?
All in the same interview.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Very animated discussion, let me show you.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine.
Yes. And I'm not making this up, I would like to add. This really happened.
I believe you.
Yeah.
Anything else that you didn't like while being a candidate, how an employer reacted, treated you? Anything else that you've experienced?
No, I would say this goes pretty far already. What surprised me, and I deliberately said this was 5 years ago, what surprised me was the fact that, I mean, with a visible track record, and evidently most of my time was dedicated to my career, I would still be asked questions about my personal life, family, do you have kids, and the like.
Well, because women are still being asked that directly or indirectly about their family planning, family life. How would you advise somebody to answer that?
It's hard to say. I think it also depends largely on whether you want that job or not and how candid you want to be. I usually just give a straight answer about my marital status, and that's pretty much it. And I also remember I think that was pretty much in the same time span. All of a sudden, there comes the question, are you married, or something to that extent? And I just looked at him and I said, that comes a little suddenly. I mean, we only just met.
I like that.
And I think that I think there I was really in Olympic shape. And I also remember somebody, that was 7 years ago, I keep track, again, a gentleman, of course, asked me, he tried to phrase it a little nicer than most. He asked, do you live alone? And I said, well, actually, no, I have a golden retriever.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't quite think he got the answer, but never mind.
Okay. Okay, I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I like it, but it also shows the level of awareness of whoever's conducting those interviews.
Yes.
Now, what kind of tips would you have for, and I mean, you've mentioned it a couple of times already, there's lots of changes in the job market, a lot of layoffs, and layoffs happen to people that are super competent, experienced, etc. And it does also happen to people who have not been looking for a job for the last 10 years. So what kind of advice would you give an experienced manager and executive who are probably in their early, mid, late 40s for the first time in a long time looking for a job? Where should they start? Let's say they got, I don't know, at the end of August, they got informed, listen, this is September is going to be your last month, or these are your last 3 months.
Yes.
And what next?
Right. I would say normally one suggestion is inform as many people in your network as possible, because you never know who knows somebody who is looking for a job, and that's certainly a good idea. I would definitely suggest that you either ask somebody, a real life person who knows you and who does hiring for a living and takes their job seriously, to give you some first-hand advice and also run simulations with you. If you have an HR person in your network, circle of friends, maybe extended family, whatever, I think you get the picture, treat that person extra nicely so he or she can help you out and give you some pointers, because I understand that for almost anybody who will have to start looking again after quite a number of years, and given all the changes that have taken place in the meantime, this must be quite a scary thought. So my first advice, please don't despair, as tedious as it may seem, and it may take a while, but please don't give up. I think that is my prime advice for you. Next, my suggestion would be do as many test drives as you can before you get into the real race. Because even if it's for jobs that you don't really pine for, the least you will get out of this is exposure and real life experience, and they are difficult to match no matter how many simulations you do. I mean, you can do as many as you like till you're blue in the face, but the real thing is hard to be beaten. And those, I think, would be the prime ideas.
Okay. What's been the best and worst career advice you have ever received?
My best advice came from my mother, and she said, go for it. You wouldn't forgive yourself if you didn't. And I think she was right. Thanks, Mom.
And the worst?
The worst came from a supervisor of mine. And again, I'm not making this up. So lo and behold, here is almost the exact expression. What do you want a career for? You're only a woman. I was a lot younger when that comment came my way.
Still, there are still women nowadays that receive that advice from friendly male colleagues.
Right.
Okay. We've been talking about the past a lot, how the job market has changed and how the job market has accelerated over the last 6 months. What do you see stay or evolve over the next year or two? What's the new normal on the job market?
Well, what will probably stay with us for the very long haul is increased digitalization. So people should get ready for more recruit bots or similar. I think human interaction is going to become less and less pronounced, at least at an early stage. So again, preparation is key, be it by not necessarily copying each word which is in the job description, but by paying very close attention to what the employer is looking for. Because if you send a resume, one size fits all, oh yeah, that'll do her, I don't think you're going to get very far. So my advice is prepare yourselves and also adjust the resumes you are sending for a specific company, for a specific person or specific position. It's a no-go if you send some resume and motivation letter to company XYZ and then address the company as Dear Company ABC. Please do your copy paste right.
Yeah. What about the HR side? Anything that HR will have to adapt to, evolve to in the next year or two?
Depending on the professions or the vacancies to be filled, I think HR plus the recruiting departments may also have to show a lot more flexibility. And this is something I also noticed while trying to fill positions last year, for instance. Which are the ones we could possibly let go of if we feel we don't get a sufficient number of candidates who could do the job? Which are the ones we could, well, for which we could train the incumbents on the job once they're actually here? So rather than expect people to, let's see, do integral fractions or something, let's say it's sufficient if they can count to 10. I mean, this is an example which is of course extreme, but I think you get my point. So I think the flexibility issue is going to become an ubiquitous one, covering all parties concerned.
Okay. And I think that's going to be my last question, unless you want to add something at the very end. If you could change one single thing on the job market, candidate side, HR side, whatever you could change on the job market,
right?
One thing, what would that be?
Okay. Well, it sounds to me a little as if you were, I don't know, like the fairy with the magic wand. Ding.
Yeah.
What would that be? I think if I could choose, if I had carte blanche, the answer would have to be no more constraints when it comes to hiring. So this would be the money side, meaning salaries. This would be the chain of authorization. May we actually hire? How long would it take to get the vacancy out? And so on. And of course, the availability of motivated and qualified candidates. And all that rolled into one.
Okay.
How's that?
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm so modest, isn't it?
But it's, I mean, you got to start somewhere.
Exactly.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, right? But in the
right.
Mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't think big one of the mottos?
Exactly.
There you go.
Okay. Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to add, or something I should have asked you and I haven't asked you?
No, I think we covered practically all the angles. The rest, as so often in life, is also a matter of trial and, you know, which word follows next. Well, I hope that part will not be as extensive, but I think it's absolutely worth a trial. And this is something I'm saying to candidates who are already actively looking and those who are still pondering. Yeah, if you don't try it, you'll never find out, and you're gonna have to get out there sometime. So if you are worrying, if you are wondering, should I do it? Should I rather abstain? No, give it a try. And also test your market value if you're really looking for a job.
So if I hear you right, you're repeating your mom's advice.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ricarda, thank you so much on this positive note. Thank you again for taking your time today to answer all of our questions.
My pleasure.
And for all the viewers here, you please check out our company page on LinkedIn or a blog post for the summary of today's conversation and the tips Ricarda shared today. So again, thank you very much and have a good week.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I'm really thrilled you invited me over. And on this thought, well, good luck everybody, and maybe see you sometime in an interview of mine.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.